So I'm going to introduce our lovely panelists while we still have a couple people filing in. We have Tanisha Barnett. Tanisha is Director of Engineering at MailChimp, which is one of my absolute favorite companies. And she has over 19 years of experience in the industry and very passionate about growing people and has written about this exact topic for Lead Dev and other sources. So really lucky to have Tanisha here. We've also got Johnny Ray Austin, who's the CTO at Till. And Johnny is also an international speaker and really cares about customer focus and inclusive engineering teams, which is so important for this panel topic specifically. Emma Burstow is a developer advocate at Umbraco, and she's joining us from the UK. She's also an open source maintainer, which thank you for underpinning our entire industry there, Emma. What would we do without you? And Emma actually used to teach English literature in a prior life. So there's a lot here about teaching, which I think is just fantastic overlapping experience. And then, of course, we have Phil Toland joining us as a senior engineer from PepsiCo. And Phil has been an engineer since the 90s. So, like Tanisha, a lot of years of experience here, which is just absolutely fantastic. So let's roll in. We're going to go into our panel chat here. And we'll start off with mentoring your junior engineers. I think we all know that that would be a nice thing to do. There's no one who's like actively against mentoring. If you are, you probably would be in this panel. That would be a different panel. But it's something that I know from personal experience, it's difficult to make time for, to figure out, to start doing. So we're going to talk a little bit here about how do we actually do this? How do we mentor people? How does that look? So Tanisha, let's start off with you over at MailChimp. How does this look? How do you get it right? What does your mentoring look like?
So we do have formal mentorship, but I would say for me, it's not a formal process that I go through. I know that we have a lot of junior engineers that are joining our teams. And so I take that initiative to kind of reach out, because sometimes it's hard for someone that's junior or new to a company to reach out to someone and say, hey, I need some help, or to answer questions. So one of the things that I make sure I do is I put it on my calendar. And I reach out to them and just make the connection with them so that when they need help, or if they have questions, or if other things are happening, they've already built a relationship or built some foundation with me and some others that it makes it easier to come back and ask questions later. So that's one of the things I do on purpose, put it on my calendar, because we all get busy and then it becomes an item on a list versus something that's coming up and you're looking forward to just having those conversations. So.
Absolutely. And Phil, I know in your experience, perhaps you can talk a bit about the position of being a mentee, how that's such a vulnerable position to be in.
It is. I sat down and talked with some of my mentees before this in order to prepare. It's been a while since I was on the other side of the table. And some of the things they said were, fairly predictable. There were things that I had anticipated, but one thing that came up over and over again is they said the role of mentee is one that requires vulnerability if it's going to be successful, right? You have to, go to this senior person in your organization and admit that maybe you don't know how to do your job, right? Which isn't something that, most people sort of, you feel like, oh man, if I tell them too much, maybe this could affect my prospects. So you really have to be safe, right? And as a mentee, you want to know that the person on the other end really cares about you as a person and where you're going, and is going to sort of listen to your specific problems, because I think one of the worst things a mentor can do is just assume that everybody needs the same advice, and dish it out. I think as a mentor, we have to listen as much as we talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we'll go into the different learning styles here. Something I love that Emma said is, you're going to mentor your junior engineers. It will happen. Your choice is, do you want to plan for it, or do you want to have it happen sort of ad hoc when you're, it's least convenient for you? Emma, tell me about how you do that. How do you plan for it, and how do you do it in that more holistic way?
I think that it's interesting because I remember saying that too, like, you're going to make time for it. And since we spoke last, I've witnessed some of the ways that we actually watch that play out. I was a junior that needed a specific kind of support, and every junior will be in that vulnerable state where they need a specific kind of support. So I'm a big fan of strategy, but I don't think we can over strategize too. So in terms of making the time, I think that if expectations are set early, and if expectations are clear, your juniors understand how much time they will have, and the people mentoring them understand how much time they need to give, then everybody's happy. So I really believe in kind of making things clear before you enter that relationship. And I do believe that you will make the time. So you can have unsupported juniors who will be asking for time in different ways, sometimes not even verbally, but because things are taking them longer, or unsupported juniors who perhaps leave, which costs you time too, because the next person has to come. So whilst it's really galling when you're planning a project to plan in these hours that don't feel as though you're making progress, my argument is you are making progress. And, you can either acknowledge honestly that that's the case, or you can, kind of and do something about it, or you can just hope that it works itself out. So for me in particular, the way that we handle it at my company is that we make sure that that relationship is front loaded. So mentors know what to do, mentees know what to expect, and then that strategy is constantly reassessed, sometimes just person to person, but also in a formal way, so that if people aren't communicating in a way that makes that clear, we ask, much like what Tanisha said, you check in and you ask, are you getting the time you need? Are you getting the kind of support you need?
Absolutely. And then Johnny, you have a post on this about mentoring your junior engineers, and how it's not a time suck, it's an investment, and it's a job requirement for seniors. So tell us a little bit more about, who is supposed to be doing this, planning out that Emma is talking about, and how do you fit that in with other duties?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I mean, for us here at Till, this is very much woven into the fabric of our day-to-day duties. Obviously, there's always an individual who's paired up with a more junior person who comes on board. But even beyond that, I even view this as a group responsibility, this idea of group mentoring. So for instance, Tanisha and pretty much everyone talked about basically what I refer to, it's psychological safety, having, juniors be okay with asking questions of the team. And you really want it to go beyond that individual. So something as simple as encouraging the entire team to ask questions out in the open, right? If someone asks me a question, I'll proactively say, let's take this to the public, right? Ask me this in the public, or I'll trip up sometimes and ask someone in a DM and say, you know what, don't answer. I'll ask in another channel, to really groom people to know that it's okay to ask questions. And so at that point, the entire team is taking on the burden of mentoring in a way, and you sort of avoid sort of like putting it all on one person. You still want to have that buddy, that person that's there and available to that person to speak directly to if they need to, but really making this a part of the culture so that everyone participates actively in the mentoring process.
Absolutely. And Johnny, I believe that you had that built into your career frameworks, I think, where it was a job requirement for seniors, or what was it? You can't be a senior if you're not mentoring, something like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. At Till, coding is great, and shipping is great, but one of the core pieces of your duties and responsibility are to mentor. And if you're not doing that, you're quite simply not meeting minimum expectations. And so we work very hard to sort of, continue to cultivate that culture, and everyone is very understanding of that. And so as a result, we have a very highly collaborative team who wants to mentor. I'm often under the pressure to hire more junior people so that they have more people to mentor, because people want to make sure they're doing a good job. And so creating the right incentives to make sure that people are doing these things are really important.
Absolutely. And that answers one of our Q&A questions. Hi, Stephen. This is a friend of mine in the audience, which is lovely. Thanks for asking a question. Everybody, you can please use the Zoom Q&A to ask us any questions, but how do you get your company to hire juniors? Well, if your organization is designed the way that Johnny's is, I mean, Johnny, you're saying you're actually coming under pressure to hire juniors. It's the opposite. Was that always the case, or did you have to make a bit of an organizational change there?
Well, at Till, that's generally always been the case. I mean, we're a very young company. We've only been around for about 3 years. I've been here for over 2 of them. So I was very much a part of building this culture, but I have been in organizations where this wasn't very well understood. The idea was that, you know, I need to add more people with more seniority and then everything will just go faster. But I think that really having the hard conversation with leadership about, or management, that, you know, this is just simply not true all of the time, right? This is very much, you know, a myth, right? Sometimes this could be helpful, but adding more people with more seniority doesn't necessarily make things go faster. In fact, sometimes it can hurt the process, right? You get too many senior people in a room, you have the too many cooks in the kitchen problem, and things can actually grind to a halt. And so, like, very much explaining this to management and having them understand how software gets developed, how progress gets made. And sometimes you just need to bring in people who are really good, really smart, and want to learn and are capable of coming up to speed is actually the faster path than bringing in yet another person with 20 years of experience who swears that the way they did it at their last job is the way to do it, you know, versus the person with 20 years experience who did it a certain way at their job and they swear that that's the way they do it. That's a big problem that you can have, and it can really stall things.
Can I add to that, actually? Because I love that culture, and I was almost hoping that I'd get a chance to defend it, because it's like, absolutely, it has to be the way. And seeing the question, one of the things that I brought from my last career into this one is this understanding that as a teacher, you learn. So when you're mentoring someone, you will find out the limits of your understanding around a concept when you try to teach it. And when I was looking after teenagers, you know, I'd say to them, teach your friend that. Like, if you think you know that, if you want to go from a B to an A, teach your friend that. And it was the easiest bit of hands-on teaching I could do. And in the engineering world, I've had exactly the same thing where I've sat down and I've been like, right, I know all about dependency injection now. I'm going to write about it. I don't. It turns out I don't know all about it, you know, and it's that very act of trying to translate what's in here to the story to pass it on to somebody else that solidifies that learning. So if your seniors are mentoring, they know their stuff. If they didn't know their stuff before they started mentoring, they do afterwards. It's such an investment in the mentors as well as the people being mentored.
I'd like to just
such a good point. Yeah.
I'd just like to add one quick thing on there, is that as a leader, when I'm looking at the team, it's the team's job to produce the product. It's my job to build the team. And I have to think like long term, what's going to happen a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And so I want to have some juniors on board that we can grow, that we can mentor. They're going to be the backbone of our team in a year or two. I want to have, you know, like a good solid core of engineers who are right in the middle, who are you know, have graduated from that junior status. They're hard workers, heads down, and they're growing their careers into that senior status. And then like just a core of seniors that really form the backbone of the team, that can do the mentoring, that can do the teaching. And ideally, they form part of my leadership bench, right? Like if everything's going well, if we have a good leadership culture and we have engineers who want to explore that leadership side of the role, then I have that strong bench in my seniors that I can promote up into leadership. I've got a class right behind them, and I'm growing the young engineers, which is good for the company, but it's also good for the industry.
That's exactly what I was going to say, what Phil was talking about, doing that succession planning. It's all about growing people in their careers. So to be able to grow people in their different careers, you've got to be able to introduce more junior engineers to your teams, to give your seniors more that ability to be able to mentor and to show and to teach, so that your organization also grows. Our junior engineers bring in a lot of different ideas and things that they're learning that are out there, that maybe someone that's got 20 years of experience, like you said, Johnny, that they are saying, hey, here's the way I've done it. But bringing in people from different backgrounds and different experiences and junior levels really helps the organization to really grow and to expand.
Yep.
So just to recap what we've got here so far for actionable tips, we have put it on your calendar. This is when the mentoring will happen. That's how you know you're going to do it. Thanks, Tanisha. Also, expectation setting. Be very clear with your junior engineers. What are the expectations for time? What investment are they going to get? Be aligned on that. If it's formal, if it's informal, just make it really clear. It's very important to build a trusting relationship so that people will ask for help. As Phil said, it's an extremely vulnerable position for a junior person, a new person, to admit they can't do their job, which is essentially what's happening there. So really build that relationship. And as Johnny said, it's really important to redirect questions to public areas as much as you can. Why it builds a culture where asking questions in general is something that is happening. Quite a few people here mentioning that it's a core duty for a senior engineer. And not only is it, this is what you just must do as a senior, but the question, how do you continue to grow your senior engineers? The answer is actually, we'll have them mentored. As Emma says, if you can't teach something, don't know your stuff. And if you need to learn your stuff, teaching is going to be the fastest way. So that's what we've sort of covered a lot of ground so far. I wanted to touch on the types of learning that people have and some of the anti-patterns that we see mentors, fall into, or organizations fall into. Emma, obviously as a, professional teacher in a prior life, tell us a little bit there about, types of learning and anti-patterns you see in the tech industry in general here.
So back in my previous life, we took different learning styles very, very seriously. So if we were to create a lesson plan, we couldn't then be assessed on said lesson unless we could show that we had met objectives for all kinds of learners. Back then we broke it into 3 categories. So people who learn by hearing, people who learn by watching, and people who learn by doing, basically. And I've said that because I can't pronounce all of the words, so forgive me. And I know that since
so was that was watching, doing, and the first one was
hearing, watching, doing.
Hearing, watching, doing. Yeah. Fascinating.
And that's since been expanded. And I think even breaking it down to just a few types can be a little bit reductive because we kind of move around. We learn differently with different topics too. When I came into the industry, what I found was that most companies take the approach, what have their seniors been doing? How did they come up? Like, how do they like learning? That's how they're going to mentor. And there's no real, we don't always have the education to then translate that into what might my mentee need. And as we're seeing so many more people come into the industry from a range of backgrounds, I think before we went live, we were talking about some of us having, like my degree was in English, so I'm not the only one here. We're coming in with really diverse skill sets, and our learners will be too. So my biggest bugbear is a kind of, you have 3 hours a week to improve yourself. Here is a sign in for a learning platform. Knock yourself out, go and have fun. And it's like, some people will pick up a new tech that way. They will absolutely love being given 3 hours to get their head stuck into something. Some people will want to be building right away, building prototypes, but lots of other people will want to learn in collaboration with others. So if you can't provide that for your learner, you can't say, I have 3 hours to give you, sit with me, let's, pair program, or you can shadow me, or any of these things, then that's when we lean on tech communities, because they'll just, and I won't go into that right now because I'm aware that we might talk about it later, but we can always draw on other resources in order to suit people's styles. And we learn about how they like to learn, again, by just talking. It's having the thought in the first place to ask the question, how did you get here? Because some juniors have come through boot camp, some juniors are self-taught, some juniors are university educated. What worked for you up to this point? Let's build on that. And then there's so little hand-holding that's needed because you're asking them to do more of what they've already found works.
Can I add to that, Katie? So, as you were talking, Emma, about, talking to them, getting to know them, I think one of the things that I've done when I am mentoring and when I'm talking to some of our senior engineers about mentoring is really getting to know the junior engineer, really understanding not just their technical background, but like you said, Emma, how did they get here? Because all those different experiences and things that are happened in their life tell you a little bit about how they're learning, what they're looking for, how to make those connections with them so that it's easier to build that natural relationship, so that if they need help or if they've got questions, that they can actually come to and talk to you because you've made that connection and you know the things that make them tick. So that's one of the things that I think is so important that when I scheduled sessions with junior engineers, the first thing I've done is like, this meeting is not sometimes it feels like they're coming to the principal's office as a director, but I'm like, nope, I have no agenda. I really just want to get to know you. I want to understand, how did you get here? Why are you here? What has your experiences been like? So that they build that relationship with me. That's just a calming foundational relationship, so that if they have questions, they can come back and they feel a little bit more comfortable coming and asking. So I think that's so important as a mentor, to really build that relationship and make that connection and learn from them.
Absolutely. And Johnny, one of the sort of related anti-patterns here you raised, I know, is when we don't challenge our juniors enough. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? You know, when we're stuck in teach mode, with beginner mode. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, one of the big things I've noticed over the years is, some organizations will conflate the idea of scope and difficulty, and just give all their juniors all the real easy things to, and that's fine for like the first week to kind of warm them up a little bit, but nothing is more soul crushing to a junior than to step into an environment with a lot of high hopes about growing, and then to get all of the real easy stuff that no one else wants to do or no one else wants to touch, right? So this is difficult to do. You have to proactively identify this work. We do this at Till as well. It's like, oh, this is the thing we need to do. It's not necessarily critical path. It's interesting work. Let's just make this an onboarding task for someone, right? And we'll just set it aside and it'll just be labeled as such. So doing the work up front of proactively identifying chunks of work that are limited in scope and appropriate for a junior, but not necessarily a very straightforward, very easy thing to do. So it allows them to have something to work on, something to challenge them, to help them grow a little bit, but also not very overwhelming for them. So, and like I said, this takes work. It's not just something that happens naturally. So you have to actually, proactively do the work to figure out what those tasks are. And then resist the temptation to go in and just do them immediately, just because you know exactly how you would do it. And I'm guilty of this as well.
I think something that's very interesting about what Johnny brings up is that we have to be willing to let them fail, right? I think as leaders, as seniors, we'll set a challenge, and then the second it looks like they're not going to succeed, we rush in and rescue, right? And I don't think you don't want them to be sort of crushed by the difficulty. You don't want them to feel like there's no possible way that you can do it. But I found, a great tool working with junior developers is just saying, you know what, I think you can do this. I believe in you. I'm going to give you something that stretches you a little bit. And, if it's too much, let me know, we'll adjust. But, I want to give them every opportunity to show me what they can do. Failing is a fantastic learning experience. I want to make sure that we create that environment where failure is accepted and even celebrated as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to get better.
Yep.
Yeah. When I was a junior, my seniors would fail publicly. Not necessarily because, they wanted to show us how to, but because I worked in cultures that were really safe, and it was allowed, it was encouraged, to share your woes. And so I was never in a position where I was too embarrassed to say, I'm in despair, I'm in this place. It was public failure is an amazing tool.
Yeah.
And Phil, I know related to this is the sort of growth mindset topic, which we can't really talk about juniors growth anything without the Carol Dweck growth mindset topic coming up. So yeah,
I think that so I'm very fortunate in that the teams that I'm working with right now at PepsiCo, I have two teams. One I formed myself last fall, and the other one I took over this spring after one of our other leaders left the company. They're both fairly young teams. So I had an opportunity to establish the culture at the beginning, right? And I set a set of guiding principles that sort of provide the blueprint, the framework for that culture, and then make sure that I try to model that myself. And one of those things I try to model is business can be chaotic, and it's very often for senior management to say, oh, we changed our mind, we want to do this, right? And everybody sort of lights their hair on fire and runs around. And I want to provide that that calmness, that stability, that like, okay, put your hair out, this isn't worth panicking over, we can do this, right? I'm my teams are both kind of small, and I like to say we're the little teams that could. And I love that attitude of like, bring it on, right? Bring it on. We will deal with it. And I think that the engineers on my team, seeing that model, then both junior and senior feel like, okay, we can handle whatever gets thrown at us. And like I said, I'm very proud of my teams. I'm very proud of the engineers who work on them. They're all great people. And I make sure that they know that, right? That I have absolute confidence. And, I never sweat going on a long vacation.
That's so important. I'm actually on a 6-week sabbatical, and not worried about my team. Yeah, but I like that phrase there. I don't know if anyone from Buffer is here, but you're definitely going to hear "put your hair out" when I come back. Yeah, I like that.
I like that.
Yeah. Why do you think I'm bald?
Amazing.
It loops back round to time again as well, because if you create a culture with all this planning, then you have time to allow people to get to a point where they don't know what to do next, and not to feel penalized, like, oh goodness, I'm about to let the whole team down, the client will be cross. Good planning will create that sense of a fertile environment for learning. It will also get your projects delivered on time. There's no argument against good planning, is there? But yeah, if you can create the time, then you can have that environment. And you mentioned mindset as well. You mentioned Carol Dweck, and that's like the #1 resource for me that I would recommend people read. And I find it quite interesting. So growth mindset is this idea that you can do anything if you work for it, that you can learn, that you can change, and that failure is something you can climb over as opposed to something that defines you. And a fixed mindset, we are our achievements, failure does define me, etc., etc. And I find that I can be incredibly happy in a growth mindset until I'm out of time, until my hair's on fire, and then watch me. It's back and forth. So
I just remind myself, and I remind my team, that we can accomplish. There's nothing that we can't accomplish. So anything that gets thrown at us, we can figure out how to make it work and how to move forward. And as a group, together, that's what we're there for. And that's why, as Johnny, you were talking about asking questions in public and answering in public, and us as leaders doing that same thing, asking those questions in public, makes others feel comfortable and making them feel like we're all in it together. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, it also allows other people to shine as well. To Tanisha's point, when you ask questions in public, you allow people to play to their strengths. Like, hey, I worked on that thing. I haven't been here for that long. I can answer this question. And so you have this residual effect of reinforcing people's confidence throughout the team as they, are still junior, but they get an opportunity to work on things. And so like they become, I don't want to say necessarily the subject matter experts, but sometimes that's the case. Like I'll go to junior people all the time, like, hey, what the heck is this thing? Can you help explain this to me? Right. And, I know this has like a certain effect, it's like the boss coming in, like asking a question, but, at the same time, it definitely helps to boost people's confidence, especially, when you actually learn something, which I learn all the time from the folks on my team. And so it's just a gratifying feeling all the way around.
I think it helps a lot as a leader if you can step back a little bit, because when you're in the trenches, and people are setting their hair on fire, it's really hard not to set your own hair on fire, right? Like everybody's panicking. Okay, but when you can step back a little bit and take that bigger picture and people start panicking, you can say, you know what? It's okay, right? It's fine. And just a few words, you want your team to see you as backup, not the taskmaster.
Absolutely. So we've got some great questions coming in onto the Q&A, and I'm just going to recap sort of, part B here, or what are the takeaways. So people have different types of learning. This is reductive, yes, but remember it's hearing, watching, and doing. There are more, but sort of at least 3 different ones. How exactly do you cater to these different learning styles? Folks have said pair programming, shadowing, relying on tech communities, learning platforms. Those are all good options. Very important to figure out who is your junior engineer and how did they get here. That'll give you insight into their learning style. Remember that scope not equal difficulty. You want to give them difficult, but scope down. Not easy, but write every React button here, slightly more round corners. That's important. Let people fail, build that in, and ask and answer questions in public, and role modeling that kind of like calm culture and that growth mindset oriented culture. Put your hair out, we can handle this, the team that could. These are all things you can do to help create an environment that's conducive to learning. So a lot of great takeaways there. In our Q&A, quick one here, is there an ideal ratio between junior to senior so that you don't have too many cooks in the kitchen, but you still have support for the juniors? Phil, since you do have these sort of cohorts that you create, like, do you aim for a ratio? What is that?
So ideally what I'd like to see, and my teams are a bit small, so we're not quite there yet, but what I'd like to see is something that looks kind of like a bell curve, right? So we've got a few juniors, a few seniors, and then, the yeomen, the folks who do the real hard work, they're that bump in the middle, right? The thing is, so I'm a big proponent of lean thinking, and in lean thinking, we tend to think about capacity and throughput versus just, velocity or things done, things like that. And so when I'm thinking about the team structure and how many juniors can we support and how many seniors, make sense here, I'm thinking about that capacity thing. Right. So if I add a junior, how is that going to affect our capacity? And what I found, so we just recently had a junior developer join one of my teams here a couple of months ago. He's doing fantastic. And I keep very close, sort of a close eye on my team cycle time so I can sort of see how things are going. And when our new guy joined, he spent almost 100% of his time pairing for the first several weeks with our senior engineers, and the cycle time really didn't budge much, right? So I got that one right. Don't always get it right, but I managed to get that one right, and I think that speaks real volumes to the quality of the seniors on that team. But that's kind of, like in general, I kind of want that bell curve. More specifically, I'm looking at the team and their capacity, and honestly, I want to have as many juniors as I think they can support, because they're, like I said, they're going to be the future backbone of the team.
Right. So you want to, you start with your teachers at this end of the bell curve. You see, well, how many juniors can they support? That determines how many at the other end. And what you're looking for is the bulge in the middle. Most of your team here is, solid intermediate independent workers. Yeah. Related to this, we have another question here where, ramp up time is always a thing. How do you determine if you've hired a junior into development that just isn't a good mutual fit, or if you haven't provided the right mentoring? So the assumption here in the question is, you hired someone and it's not going well for whatever reason. Are you bad at mentoring them, or are they just not succeeding at your company and you should part ways or do some kind of performance improvement plan? That's a tricky one. Yeah. Does anyone have a method?
I would probably say that if you're taking the approach that Tanisha spoke about too, and that actually we probably all touched upon, which is this really close contact with juniors. And I don't mean you have to be in their pockets all the time, but, you know, nurturing that relationship. You will know sooner rather than later. And you'll know because it will be coming from them as well as from your instincts. And you'll be speaking to your team too. And I'm not suggesting that any of us should be these kind of helicopter managers who are always there, but that open door, that kind of open lines of communication will tell you so much about whether they're progressing in a way that you can take forward or whether it's unsustainable. Hopefully they'd be the first to let you know. Of course, there would always be edge cases, but I think that's the only real way that you stand a chance in telling, because, you know, there is ramp up time, and how much do you put down to this is ramp up, you know? We can't always measure it in output and we can't always measure it in numbers. So it's, again, it comes back to that solid relationship with all of your team, essentially.
Yeah. I see a lot of nodding here. Yeah.
I agree with what Emma was saying. You know, the thing about mentoring and, you know, ramping up juniors or really anyone on your team, the best thing you can do is kind of, you know, leave the door open, but, you know, you can't kick people through it, right? So making sure that you and your team are always available. And like the number one question I ask, not just juniors, but all new hires, is like, how can I be more helpful? Like, what can I do to help you do your job? And, you know, if the answer is always nothing, but, you know, still things aren't getting done, you know, then you could observe that you may have a problem on your hands. Like either, you know, this person is, you know, not receiving the help that is being offered, or the help is not being offered. So you have two things that you need to investigate. You know, either your team is not doing their job, or this person is, you know, not actually receiving this help for whatever reason. And so you can take action accordingly there. But just checking in and making sure, you know, you're always available and always asking how you can be helpful is something that I've found to be pretty helpful.
Yeah, and also I think it's very important to recognize that not everyone is a good fit for every role, right? Like, you know, when we're interviewing as companies, like we're intentionally selecting out candidates. But when I interview candidates, I always tell them, I want you to spend as much time looking at us as we look at you, right? And figure out, are we a good fit for you? And so, you know, when we talk about people who just aren't fitting into the role, I like to say that they're in the wrong chair, right? This isn't a judgmental thing. It's not that you're terrible, just they're not in the right role. And you know, if possible, I always like to see if I can't find, if they're a good, you know, a good worker and a good person, I want to find a role for them somewhere else, maybe in the same organization if it exists. And, you know, I think that non-judgmental attitude really sort of leaves the door open for the person to tell you whether they're going to succeed in the role or not. And I found that most of the time when I have a conversation about performance, as opposed to sort of behavioral issues, but when I have a conversation about performance, people know, right? You sit down, you talk to them and they're like, yelp, you know. And so, you know, the question is, okay, so what do we do about that? Right. And at some point, it's just going to be really obvious to everyone involved that it's not working out. And, you know, I like to say we're all going to have a last day in our role. We're all going to have a last day at the company, and that's okay. And if we're in the wrong chair, we can change chairs, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, it's actually okay that we are growing or we've decided that the chair doesn't fit us anymore and we're looking for something else. And I even still have people who, you know, mutually we've decided that this isn't the place for them, but they're still connected because I'm still want to be able to support them in their career and their growth. And that tells you a lot about that. It's about performance. It's not people know, like you said, Phil, people know when they aren't performing or things aren't going well in the chair that they're sitting in, but that doesn't mean that they are not made for the company. It just means that maybe this situation is not meant for both parties, and it's okay. We're growing and as people, so it's okay to make that decision for yourself because you have to choose the company also.
This answer actually answers one of the questions that I've just seen here too, which is this idea of what about people who have plateaued? And I think it's the same answer as for them. Like, what chair are they sitting in? I like this chair idea, by the way. I'm going to run with that. And the hair on fire I'm taking with me. But yeah, there are different chairs for people. Like, my chair has changed in the time that I've been in the tech industry. I've worked in different roles and I found one that really, really suits me. It was, I needed all the chairs to get here. And that was with a combination of people who had time to mentor me inside and outside of my organization. And people who could see that if I wasn't happy, there's another place. There's always another place. And I think that's true for people who've been around a long time too. Have them mentoring or have them doing something else, and if they're not happy, speak to them, see what else they can be doing.
I think it's important to, when we talk about plateauing, to recognize that some people just reach a point where they're happy, right? They're good, right? Maybe they reach that mid-level engineer spot and they keep their head down, they do good work, and they go home at the end of the day, right? And I think we should encourage that, right? Just because we have hierarchical organizations doesn't mean it should be everybody's goal to be the CEO one day, right? And I think it is really a powerful thing for somebody to find that spot where they fit and be okay with it.
Absolutely. Couple more questions coming in here. First one, that should be quick. How do you mentor juniors when your organization has a matrix management structure? Matrix management is where you've got your line manager who has the power to fire you, and then you've got a different person directing your day-to-day operations, so telling you what to do. Sorry, as a really hacky description of what is matrix management. The person who tells you what to do and the person who can fire you are not the same person. So where does the mentoring fit in that? And it's very common in engineering teams to have a matrix structure. It's like, well, the EM is typically not necessarily like the leader of the team. Yeah. Does anyone here who has a matrix structure in their current team?
I do.
You do? Okay, Tanisha, you take the answer. Yeah.
So one of the things I do is, like, when we bring in a junior engineer, I make sure that their official mentor is on the same team that they are on. So if we decide to move things around or switch things around, the one thing that I require is that that junior engineer stays with their official mentor so that they have that consistency, even if their engineering manager might change. That gives them that they have somebody that they've already connected with that's working well. And that consistency, I think, helps along the way versus switching them around, which may actually impact their career growth, because now they are having to connect with someone else and learn something new, or learn that new mentor might have to learn how they work, which may slow them down and may impact their motivation. So that's really the biggest thing that I put in place, is that even if we switching people around or switching things around, or from a matrix perspective, things change, the official mentor and junior engineer, as long as they are still junior, they're staying together on the same squad and project and team.
Excellent. Well, that flew by. We are out of time. A lot of takeaways here, and we are now all going to keep the party going in the Slack channel, Continuous Learner. So please do join us over there. And we've covered a lot of really great topics. Put it on your calendar. Asking in public, very important. It is a senior engineer's job to mentor. If you're a matrix structure, just make sure they're on the same squad. People have different types of learning, and scope and difficulty are not the same thing. And yes, it takes work to get something that's hard but small in scope, and it's your job to find that. So excellent. We will see you all over in the Slack channel, and thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for taking the time out of your busy schedules to share all of this wisdom with us.
Thank you for looking after us.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Bye, everyone.